Hello, and welcome to the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast, the podcast redefining women's health, one unfiltered conversation at a time. I'm your host, Jacqueline Rose, and every week I'll sit down with leading women's health experts and real women to share their lived experiences, bust health myths, challenge outdated and uninformed narratives, and explore what's really possible for women. We'll talk about periods, fertility, menopause, hormones, aging, and everything in between. This podcast is for every woman who ever felt confused, dismissed, or left out of the conversation about her own health. It is a space to celebrate women, break the silence, and open up conversations between mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Please hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode and share this podcast with your daughters, family, and friends. Let's get on with the episode.
Hmm. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. Today, we are going to have another really interesting conversation. Many of our conversations revolve around women's health from a very physical or emotional perspective. But sometimes when we talk about women's health, we want to go slightly deeper. And today, that is going to be one of those experiences. We're looking at women's health in a much broader spiritual context. And this conversation is also going to really touch on that intergenerational aspect of this podcast, because obviously these are conversations that we want to have between mothers and daughters, between our mothers and us as daughters. So that whole intergenerational relationship, we're really going to touch on all of that today. My guest is Sandra. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me and us. Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we will get into our conversation.
Mm, Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Sandra Wint. I am the founder of Me, Her, Us, where I help women reconnect with their authentic self so that they can reestablish who they really want to be and how they want to show up in life. I'm a Gestalt trained coach, and I'm a mother of three, and very excited to be here and have this conversation about mothering and daughtering. And
Amazing.
yeah.
So, when you say at the beginning that you really help women to become their most authentic self, for me, that resonates in the work that I do with our menopause journey, because one of the definitions that I use for this menopause journey that so many of us, every woman goes on, whether they know it or not, is it is the journey that every woman needs to take to become her true authentic self. That stepping into that new postmenopausal identity. But I know that you don't only work with menopausal women, you work with all women of all ages. So explain to me what that means from a female perspective, regardless of age, because for me, it always has connotations in that menopausal journey. So, share with us a little bit about what that means for you, for your clients, how that shows up.
Yeah, I would say we work with the same range of women, age group, because typically my clients come to me because they are feeling a little lost. They're feeling like, hey, I spent my whole life trying to be everything somebody or everything that other people told me I needed to be successful, to be happy, to be a good daughter, to be a good mother. And then they realize they've twisted themselves up into knots. They've lost track of who they really are. They look at the woman in the mirror and they realize, I don't really even know her anymore. Who is she? What does she want? Um, and
Yeah.
I would say a lot of my women probably haven't looked at themselves in the mirror and
Yes.
really seen themselves for a really long time. So I don't tend to see women who are in the 20 to 25 year range because you need to have some life experiences of disappointment and changes and maybe things having not worked out the way you thought they were going to. And so
Life
that can,
experience.
yes. And so I think that tends to put, the ideal person that I speak with in the late 30s to mid 50s range. And sometimes they come and see me because of life situations. They're in some kind of a transition. They've become a mother and they're struggling with what that really means. They have ended a career of some sort and they're like, and I feel lost and empty. Their children maybe have gone off to school and so they're struggling with that empty nest phase, and they're like, what's next? Or there's been some significant disappointment, a divorce, a job loss, something that has caused them to be in what I call this feeling of being adrift.
Yeah, yeah. So that definitely is common at that midlife
Yeah.
transition sort of life stage. Totally. Tell me about some of the experiences that these women are going through, not in terms of their experience, but how you frame it from
Mm,
your perspective, how you're framing their experiences.
yeah. So I like to make sure that the women that I see understand that this is very normal.
Yeah.
Um, because I think oftentimes when we're in this situation, we think we're the only one experiencing this. And there's almost a sense of shame around, oh, I'm afraid to admit that being a mother isn't everything that I thought it was going to be, or that, I feel lost in my marriage, or I feel lost in my career. I think so. What I like to do is I like to normalize it, B, let them know that at some point we all start to question kind of where we're at, that
Yeah.
it's very normal in this midlife stage
Yeah.
to wonder, what does it all mean? What's it all for? What am I really here to do? And then I have some tools that I like to walk them through, in addition to it depends on how they see me, if they came in through a program or if they came in one-on-one and we're just going through some coaching together. I like to use some tools that help to kind of get to who they really are, and some exercises around whether their values are and what they're really looking for.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool. And how does this conversation, you say like they're coming to you at transitional stages. They're obviously coming to you as their own independent person, but
yes,
as I'm beginning to understand through this podcast, every mother is a daughter, and
yes,
many mothers have daughters.
yes,
There is, and if you are, exist and you have a mother, you have a grandmother, and
yes.
there is an interplay between these relationships
Oh my gosh.
that I am really beginning to learn through some of the amazing guests we've had here, that I myself never really connected deeply before. We all know our mothers, drive us crazy, or I don't want to be anything like my mother, or my mother was amazing and I want to be like her in this way, or I'm never going to say that to my child. And then I hear myself speaking the words that, and I hear my mother in my head. My mother is an amazing, phenomenal woman, but I can't believe I'm saying the things. And I say to my children, I know I sound like grandma. I can't help it. I'm really sorry. But there is this intergenerational relationship that I think is so subconscious but
Yes.
it exists. So how do you see that playing into everything?
Oh my gosh. This is such a big and beautiful question. So let's take it from the perspective of genetics and epigenetics. So when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, you were in your mother's body because your mother had a fully formed ovary with her eggs in as a fetus, as a baby inside of your grandmother. So whatever your grandmother experienced is part of your genetics epigenetic code that you are carrying. And so oftentimes things come up and we have no idea why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. And there could be an epigenetic component to it. Um,
It's funny you say that. I don't want to interrupt you. Don't forget your train of thought. Write it down if you need to. But it's really interesting what you're saying, because in my mother's family, my mother's side of the family, there are a lot of strong, powerful, opinionated women. And it's sort of like, we'd say, like, it's sort of a genetic predisposition in my
yeah,
mother's family in all very good ways. But, my grandmother and my great aunt, my great grandmother, some of my aunts, my mum, some of my cousins, my girl cousins, we all have this sort of family trait as strong female. And it's sort of like, you can call it a family trait, but in your language, I would say this was literally really, like, really in the genetics of what makes up my family sort of narrative.
yes, absolutely. So when we think about trauma gets buried in our genes, right? And it causes some genes to fully express, some genes to not be expressed, right? That's what epigenetics is all about, right? And so if your grandmother, while she was pregnant with your mother, experienced trauma, that has changed your genetic code in some format, right? And that goes back too, because your grandmother was once part of her grandmother's,
Yeah.
right? So if we think about all of the generational trauma that has been experienced by previous generations, that is somehow embedded in your genetic code. Either some genes are being expressed, other genes are not. Your body shape, your body size, how you consume food, how the food that's used in that you consume, how it's used in your body, that is all part of what gets handed down to you. And it's not just what your grandmother experienced, it could also be what your father and his mother experienced, right? So you also carry all of that. So that's the science, the genetic aspect of it. So your question was, how does this generational, how do you see all this generational play coming up? So then we're born, and we're born into a set of societies, right, and social narratives in a family of origin that has certain expectations of you, in perhaps a religious background that also has a set of expectations for you. And so that molds you. And then you go off to school and you get further socialized and molded, right? Yeah. And for me, I grew up in a very different set of cultural and scholastic environments than my parents did. So, that created some tension, right? Because they didn't understand what I was going through because it wasn't what they experienced. We had emigrated. And so, that created a set of dynamics that maybe wasn't present in my mother's family, right? But the whole idea is that, she comes into this mothering having been mothered. So who is she looking at as her model and her experience of what it means to be a mother? Because unknown to our daughters, we don't get a manual that says this is how you raise your kids, right? And right, even that has changed over the years, right? I mean, how my generation got mothered, right, is so different than how my mother's generation was mothered. And it's completely different than how I am choosing to mother, both because of brain science and how that has impacted our awareness and our understanding of childhood development, but also because of choice, right? We all make choices. And so one of the things that I learned in this process is our experience of our mothers when we are growing up is one of, she is the power structure. Mm-hmm. She's the one who is modeling what it means to love, what it means to nurture, what it means to guide, right? We, as children, when we are growing up, we don't have the power in the relationship or in the dynamic. And so when we now step into young adulthood, right? I can speak from my perspective and many of the perspectives that women who come to see me have, and that is, one of anger and frustration, as well as love and appreciation, right? And at some point you get to the point where it's like, I don't know that I want to challenge my mother anymore about these things because I've forgiven them, or I've moved past them, or they're not impacting me. But the reality is they are, because we're carrying them with us. And so a lot of the work that I do is to not just look inside of ourselves and understand how we got where we are, why we feel the way that we feel through all of these socialization systems and all of these genetic situations, but also to recognize that, gee, I can see my mother in a different light now. She was a daughter. What was it like for her to be daughtered, right? What was grandma like? What was grandma's experience of daughter like? And the reason that I think this work is so fundamental to us as humans, and especially as mothers, because once we start to recognize that our mothers were wounded daughters,
we never think about it in that way.
Yeah, we can start to let go of some of the anger and embrace more compassion for our mothers. And when we embrace people with compassion and love, we can extend that compassion and love to ourselves too. Because then we realize, oh my gosh, we're making the same mistakes, but we're making them because we come from a place of being hurt as well. And so we can step into a greater sense of self-compassion, and then we can offer that greater compassion to our daughters, our sons, and really everybody else around us.
Fascinating. I want to ask you two questions. The first one is, when you talked about this, what we term intergenerational trauma, that trauma that is passed down to us already before we're even born. Can I ask you, does it always have to be trauma?
No.
Can there also be a positive spin on that intergenerational, that, I experienced things when I was in my mother's pre-womb, let's call it, when is it always a traumatic thing that is being passed down? Can there be, positive, things that are passed down also?
Yes, absolutely.
So answer that question. And then I'm going to ask you the second question that I've got written down.
So a lot of brain science studies now show that our earliest childhood experiences are our most important, because they get buried in our brains and in our bodies in a way that we don't have language associated with them. And we don't have, our bodies remember, but we don't have cognitive memory of them. And so they get buried in our bodies, and they impact and influence us all the time. So when a baby is born, it's 100% dependent on the caregiver. And they learn love and security by being held, by being touched, by being responded to. And so the more you can do that for your child, the more you can overcome perhaps some of these other things that are part of the equation as well.
Cool. Excellent. So we're familiar with the term mothering. I think it's a term that, is very familiar within the, our societal vernacular. But you use a term daughtering. And I want you to go a little bit further into that phrase, into that term daughtering, because it's not something that we hear very often. And it connects up to these things you're talking about, but maybe try and unpack what that means a little bit, because every mother, by definition, if you're a mother, you are a daughter. And I just want you to sort of understand, this mothering versus daughtering, and sort of that interplay between it, because you could be playing both roles at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. So I came up with this term of daughtering because in the spiritual mental health, kind of trying to come to terms with mothering, oftentimes it's addressed as being called the mother wound.
Okay.
And I do not like that word at all. I think it puts a negative spin on what happened. It doesn't hold grace for our mothers. And it does not take into account the societal expectations or even the situations that our mothers were in over which they had no control. So I really dislike that term. And I did not want to use it when I was speaking about this very complex developmental, how did I learn to be who I am? So and when women are called in and invited to do this work, some of the women that I work with have chosen not to be mothers, or no longer are mothers, but for whatever reason, either their children have transitioned out of the home because they're older, or they're not yet in that place where. And so I don't want to address how we mother. I want to address how we were taught to be female, and that experience of having been somebody's daughter. So I think the one common thing with all of my clients is we're not all mothers, but we are all daughters. And so I really wanted to focus on what was that experience of being daughtered like for you? And how is that impacting your life today?
Fascinating.
And once you understand that lens, what do you want to do about it?
And it does remove, in a way, that blame game of my mother did this to me and my mother did that to me, because your mother is who she is because of her experiences.
Yes.
And it sort of shifts the focus a little bit, rather than saying like, who is your mother and how did she impact you? It's just, what was your lived experience as an experience? Without.
And some daughters, right? There's a subset of daughters whose mothers either weren't there through some situation, like they passed away, or they were in a different country, or they were separated through adoption. I mean, the experience of being daughtered doesn't single the mother. It could have been a father, it could have been an aunt, it could have been, an adoptive parent. The whole point is you had an experience growing up. You were daughtered and socialized in some way that impacted you.
Fascinating.
So let's talk about it. Right. Thank you.
That's really, really, yeah, really, really fascinating. So I guess from your work with your clients, do you see that changing that language, reframing that experience allows them a deeper understanding of who they are today, and then being able to give grace, and I don't like the word acceptance, but some type of grace to whoever was that parental figure?
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So I want to talk about it from two perspectives. The first one is societal expectations. And then the other one is reframing who my mother was, or my parent was. So, if we think about if we think about what does it mean to be a mother, right? So many women are raising their children alone. So many women are raising their children in a situation where both parents are working, and they're not working because they choose to. Well, I mean, yes, they choose to work, but they're working because there's also a need, a financial need, right? And so there's this expectation that's built in societally that, your mother is going to be at home making you cookies, and, she's going to attend to your every need, and she's going to be 100% responsive, and she's going to be this loving Madonna. Right. And we forget that, wait a minute, she's a woman. She's a woman with needs and wants and exhausted. And she goes to work every day, and she comes home and she has to make dinner for like the gazillion millionth time. And like, I'm sorry, but how many ways can you like cook chicken? Like it just, it, especially when you've just picked up your kids at like 4 o'clock and they're like starving or hungry. And so I think we put a lot of unfair expectations on mothering. And so if we think about, how humans evolved and how we grew into, we grew up in tribal groups where there were maybe 100 to 150 people in this tribal group, and it was very communal. And so there were lots of people to help with all of these activities. And now, we are a nuclear family, and our expectations is that, this woman is going to handle everybody's needs. She's going to go to work. She's going to do the shopping. She's going to figure out all the finances. She's going to have this great career. Everybody's going to have lovely laundered clothes all the time. And, it's too much, and it's unrealistic.
Yes.
And so I think once we look at, the context of what does it really mean to you to mother and to be mothered, right? I think we start to realize, wait a minute, this is impossible. One person cannot satisfy all of these. So I think it's really important to look at it from that perspective and realize that as mothers, we're set up. We're never going to be able to be everything to everyone. We're barely able sometimes to be everything we need for ourselves, much less.
And I will say, and even when you have a supportive partner, whatever that means, a spouse, a life partner, whatever that is, and even if you have a very involved partner, I do think that women are often thinking 5 steps ahead the second that they wake up. So it's not even that about sharing the physical burden. There is a mental burden. Again, I don't want to genderize it, but I do think it's a very feminine attribute that already in the morning, you're already thinking, what am I cooking for dinner? Which kid needs to go where? What appointments do I need to schedule? So in addition to your, working, being a mother, wanting to, keep your house in order, cook for your kids, provide, etc., your brain is also working at 100 miles an hour because you're already thinking about the end of the day before you've even, got up and had your first, I'm not going to say cup of coffee, maybe lemon water. but it's, and I think again, societal expectations, unfortunately, which still exist even in 2025, we still have some societal expectations. There are still things that we expect, as you've said, the woman to do it all, even though we all know it's impossible, and even though we all give space for the fact that it's impossible, somehow there still is this underlying subconscious narrative that women still need to have a family, run a home, be successful in their career, make a home cooked dinner. These things all still need to happen. And it I find it shocking that despite how far we have come, that this image is still so prevalent.
Yes. Yes. And we've internalized that from a very early age.
Yeah.
And so part of the work that I help women is not to deny what happened to them. What I ask them to do, we spend a lot of time going through what your experience was. So there's no hiding that. There's an acknowledgement that we were hurt in some way. And I asked them to think about, what was the context in which your mother grew up? What was the context in which she was raising you, right? And then, look at it from that perspective so that we can appreciate all of the pressures that our mothers experienced, fully understanding that, some of them are better resourced than others, right? I want to touch on what you said about, the mental work that goes into being a mother, because it is so real. Both my husband and I worked outside the home, and I was trying to start up my own business. So there were times when I had to be out of the house, and, he was the parent on the scene. And I distinctly recall coming home one night. It was about 9:30 when I walked through the door, and my children were older. They were, I think my boys were probably 13 or 14 at the time. And so my daughter would have been 10 or 11. So old enough to A, take responsibility for themselves, and B, if they were hungry, to have done something about it, right? Anyway, it's 9:30. I walk in, Dad's been home all day. And then everybody runs downstairs. Mom, I need this homework done. Mom, I need you to print this. Mom, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten anything. Mom, and I'm like, dude, you've been home all day.
Yeah.
And the kids themselves, they waited. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell Dad? Well, I didn't want to bother him. I was waiting for you.
I'm going to say something, because I think this happens the world over, even with the most hands-on and involved partners, and specifically male partners. I don't want this to be a man bashing conversation. I don't want this to be our husbands are incapable conversation. I don't want this to be the patriarchy is to blame for everything conversation. This is about women, but there is a reality in many women's experiences that repeats sort of the narrative that you've just said. My amazing, fantastic husband, who is very hands-on and very involved in our family and with our children. I came down yesterday to find the broom not in its place. And I said, what's the broom doing out here? So my husband responded, I swept the floor and I wanted to leave it out so you would ask why it wasn't in its place. And then you would notice that the floor had been swept. And I was like, beloved husband, I sweep the floor 3 times a day. I'm so proud of you for doing it and for leaving the broom there so that I could question. It's those types of humorous, but not humorous experiences. And again, I think,
I was gonna. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with that, and I really appreciate what you're saying about this. Is not about putting the blame on someone else. This is not, because honestly, right? I raised my children just as much as my husband did. So yes, he was sitting there, but I contributed to them waiting for me as well, right? Because somewhere
Yeah.
along the line,
Yes.
I reinforced for them
Yes.
that mom was the best person to ask
Yes.
for this. So and we often as mothers and as wives will take on an activity because we think we can do it better than our husbands
Yes.
can. And
Yes.
then, so we're just as guilty.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
not it's not about blaming or assigning blame. And I so
I
appreciate
think that's a
that.
really important point to make. I think there is an element of whether it's real or our own assumptions that we can do it better, we
Yes,
have the resources, and so we create that reality where
yes,
the children wait for the mother to come home because she is the gatekeeper for
yes,
all these functions. And I agree with you. I think often we have created that narrative sometimes to our detriment. One of the things I say to my children the whole time is um, I assume they will end up in therapy because that's just the way it goes. I said, the worst thing you should say to your therapist is that my mother was too much around. She was too available. She was too hands on. Now, obviously, there is a problem if you are too intimately involved in your child's life. But for me, it's more that my children know they can pick up the phone anytime, anywhere, and I will be available to them. They know they can ask me to do anything for them, and I will be available to them. There is a problem with that also sometimes. Um, but it's this sort of mothering, daughtering relationship of I am the product of my daughtering experience. My children are the product of my mothering experience to them, but they also have their own. It's such an intricate in. I've lost the word now.
there's so much interplay between those two
Between
ideas.
these, so interwoven between these two concepts that I don't think we've ever really had that language before to express it in that way. So I'm really, I love that you're talking so much about this.
Thank you. Thank you. I think uh, one of the other things that I notice is that when we start to do a lot of work in this area, we also start to reevaluate our own mothering, right? I know that when I started doing a lot of this work, I started to feel, and reading and learning and understanding, I started to realize that I had made my own mistakes with my own children. And so there's this sense of guilt, like, oh my gosh, I've totally messed them up, right? And I love that you said, I know that my children are going to need therapy, because I tell my children, look, started putting your college fund away when you were born, and you can choose to go to school or you can choose to use that for therapy. It's totally up to you. But I've done my role. But I think what happens when we start to look at this work and we start to say, oh, I totally messed up my children, what we forget is, and what I help the women that I work with do, is realize that the damage isn't in what we did. There may be damage in what we did,
Yeah.
but the real healing comes from taking accountability for what we did and repairing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I come to you and I say, I appreciate that, when I reacted the way that I did, that hurt your feelings and that I didn't acknowledge your experience. And I was wrong. And I'm sorry. There's a lot of power and grace and forgiveness and healing that can come from that experience.
Yeah.
So even just going to our children at whatever age they are and validating their emotional health or their emotions, and showing them what it means and modeling for them what it means to take accountability.
Yeah.
Not to excuse it, but to take accountability and say, I'm learning too, and I'm going to do better. And I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm not perfect because I'm human.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I want to ask you about something that you talk about, that daughters and sons, this is not just about our daughters, even though that is a unique relationship, but our daughters and our sons are always watching to see our behavior and how we stand up as mothers, as women, how we advocate for ourselves, how we position ourselves, professionally, personally, that we often don't realize as the mothers how they are looking at us, not just how we are impacting them directly through our behavior, but the sort of the reverse of them looking up at us in things that we're doing. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. Ooh. Um, so two things. The first thing is that this fundamental understanding is what brought me to this work in the first place.
Ooh, okay.
I went through a really difficult period of time, and it wasn't a short period of time. It was a very long period of time. And then when my daughter was about 1 or 2, I realized that I could say to her, you can be anything you want. I could say to her, you're really smart. I could say to her, oh, I love the way that you are, taking care of this person. You have such a good heart.
Yeah.
I could tell her anything, but she will never believe it if what I think about myself
Yeah.
is bad or poor.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look in the mirror and I say to myself, you're not a good person, you're not a good parent, you are not caring or loving, or and all the ways that the chatter in our head tells us that we don't measure up, then all she will ever hear is that, because that is what I am projecting when I walk in the world. So what we think about ourselves is how we present. It's it's what dictates how we approach problems and situations. It's how we advocate. It's how we talk with people. And when we don't feel good in our own space about ourselves, that's what we're communicating. And so I learned that I had to love myself and appreciate myself, and not from an egotistical perspective, but from a truly compassion based perspective. And when we can do that, that's what our kids see and hear.
Yeah.
And they're always watching. So, one of the things that I talk to women about is leadership. And they'll tell me things like, oh, I'm not a leader. And I say, every woman is a leader. You lead in your religious communities. You lead in your uh, social community. You lead in your family. Who do you think your kids are learning from? Anytime you're teaching, you're learning. And often we come at this leadership without a clear sense of what we're trying to do. It's just, I'm just walking through my life, right? And we don't consciously think about it. And so I try to make it conscious and say, what do I want my daughter to take away from this experience?
Yeah. Wow.
How do I want to model for her honoring somebody else's needs, but respecting my own boundaries as well?
Yeah.
How do I want her to understand what it means to care for ourselves? right? So oftentimes the women that I work with will say things like, well, I'm really angry at my friend's mother because, this, and this happened and she didn't step up. And I'll ask the question, um, you know, is that your expectation? Right? How are you, if your daughter was doing that, would you think that that was appropriate? Or would you counsel her to say, there needs to be a balance? And often they're caught by surprise, because my point is, when you are talking about other people, when you are judging how other people are performing, or when people say no, your daughter is also hearing, oh, it's not okay for me to stand up and push my own.
I think that is really important. And I'm trying to think of myself as a young mother. I have, many cousins now who are young mothers. And I think of, because I'm the eldest of all my cousins and the eldest in my sibling family. And so I'm now in that perimenopause stage where some of them, and many of them are not yet. And I know that as a young parent, you don't have that thought. You don't have that depth of thought because it's so in the moment, young mothering, and you're, trying to develop your career, and it's just literally getting through the days. But
Yes.
now, as for myself as an older mother, a mother of older kids, um, there is the ability to have more thought. And also,
Yes.
as kids are older and they are able to see and learn more through your actions, the decisions you make as a mother feel more impactful in sort of the language you're using of leadership and sort of what type of woman do I want to present as, so that my daughters are seeing and learning and absorbing that message, which I think is very difficult to really have a conscious awareness of when you are a younger mother.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to diminish such the point that you're making, that it is so chaotic when
Yeah,
your kids are little, when they're newborns, when they are dependent on you to feed them, to clothe them, to wash them, to
yeah,
and you have several children like I did. I had twins, and when my twins were two and a bit, 2.5, I added the third. So it's like, it's chaos,
yeah,
right? Like, you can barely keep your head above water. You are not thinking about, how do I want to approach this situation? Let's
yeah,
be thoughtful about this, Sandra.
yeah.
No, it is so important to understand that it is a progression, and you're also in the thick of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know we're going to carry on talking about this for
I
a
know.
long time because there really is so much to unpack here. But I think we've really opened up, you've really helped us open up this conversation and really begin some very interesting thoughts that I think women, you know, it, are not really having. We talk about the type of person I want to be as I age and as I mature and as I go into postmenopause. But the putting it in the context of this mothering, daughtering, this intergenerational relationship, I think is really, really profound. So thank you for bringing this to our consciousness and to our awareness. As we close up our conversation, um, this is a podcast that I've created because there are things that I want my daughters to know. Tell me what you want your daughter, nieces, goddaughters, your next generation of females. What do you want them to know? What is something that, you really feel passionate about sharing with them?
Mm. Um, I am passionate about making sure that they understand it's okay to make mistakes, and that they are always leading. And that part of the leading is being vulnerable and authentic and saying, I made a mistake and I'm learning from it. We are not perfect. We're human, and mistakes is how we learn, just as much as our successes are how we learn. So I would really want them to embrace this journey and be all they can be.
I think it's so profound. And one of the things that I'm learning also from my own daughters in relation to that is, as a young person, if you are on some type of journey, probably your friends, your contemporaries, are probably not on that same journey. And so you're going on your journey, but you're interacting with all these other girls, because we're talking about daughters, but boys and girls, but you're interacting with all these other friends that are not on your journey, and they're dealing with their own life
Garbage,
story,
whatever stuff. Yes.
their own crap. And especially when you're younger, that that ability to learn from your mistakes, apologize, take responsibility, lead in the way that you want to set yourself up as a strong voice. It's sometimes harder when you're dealing with contemporaries who are just doing the thing, and it makes it hard for those young adults who sort of want to take it to the next level. I think that is also really hard sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts
Oh
with
my
us.
gosh.
This has
Thank you
been
so
really
much.
great.
I love the work that you're doing.
You.
I think it's so important. And I love that you're creating this space for women to come together and talk about, the things we don't get a chance to think about.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sandra. Where can everyone find you? They want to learn more about what you do. They want to connect with you. Where can they find you?
So I have a website. It's me-her-us, me-her-us.com. And I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at me-her-us LLC.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm sure there are going to be women who really want to learn more about this, because this really is coming up as, I think, the next big conversation, this intergenerational relationship. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone, for listening. You can feel free to contact Sandra, contact myself, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. Have a great day.
Mm.